Welcome to the Spirit, State, and Society podcast with your hosts, André Gagné and Zachary Bourgeois, where we explore how global Pentecostal and charismatic movements intersect with politics, culture, and society.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. So last time we talked about oneness Pentecostalism, and the plan was to go into apostolic Pentecostalism, but we've actually decided to do a little bit of maybe what we'll call a bonus episode or political interlude, because we haven't touched too much on the state side of this movement, on the politics of it. So we'll be discussing an event that occurred recently that's been really important in the political imaginary of Pentecostalism, charismaticism, and evangelicalism in the United States, and that is the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So on September 10th at Utah Valley University, Charlie Kirk was assassinated during one of his Turning Point USA events, and in the aftermath of that, evangelicals have had a lot to say.
Just this past Wednesday, September 10th, we witnessed collectively something horrific. And this was the assassination of conservative, husband, father, fellow believer, Charlie Kirk. And I want to make it clear that not only did we witness evil, what we witnessed was demonic.
We're recording these podcasts a bit ahead of time because I'm on a research sabbatical. So Zach and I decided to get together and record a lot of episodes that come out about every 2 weeks. So there's all sorts of events that are going on and we don't address them directly. And the goal is not to always address every kind of event that happens either, but this is something that is quite important, like you said, in the US. I was interviewed a lot around this event recently, a lot of media here in North America, but a lot of media in Europe. And I was on a research trip there for a week. And you have questions too, because you work on Christian nationalism. So people are wondering, okay, what is your take on this? So yes, an important event because it seems to be that this assassination has also galvanized the Christian right. Everybody knows pretty much the fact that there was this big memorial that lasted several hours in Arizona. You had all the political class, the important people that were there, people from Turning Point USA. Of course, Erica Kirk was there saying some words about her husband. Even the president was there. Yeah. Vice President, Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, everybody was there.
A lot of people were likening it to a revival.
Oh,
just to bring in
absolutely.
This element of evangelicalism and Pentecostalism.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating about what you just said, I sat down and I watched the entire thing. Some people ask me, how do you do that? But that's part of our job. So, the first person to come up on stage and start talking was Rob McCoy. Now, for people that don't know Rob McCoy, he's the founding pastor of Godspeak Calvary Church in Newberry, California. And he's often seen as one of the mentors of Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk called him a kind of a spiritual father, even if Charlie Kirk didn't go to that church particularly, but he went to Luke Barnett's church, Dream City Church in Phoenix. That's where he attended church.
Which is an Assemblies of God affiliated church.
Yeah, it's a Pentecostal church. Yeah. So Rob McCoy comes up to the stage. The first thing he does, of course, he says a few words about Charlie Kirk, but the first thing he does is that he preaches the gospel message. He preaches like we were used to seeing Billy Graham doing in the big stadiums when he used to do his crusades. And Rob McCoy, he's the first one coming up, says a few words about Charlie Kirk, then preaches exactly what the gospel message is and how it's understood in those circles. And then he asks people who want to receive the Lord to stand up. And people beside them to pray with them, and they will do a follow-up and everything. So it's an altar call. Yeah. They don't come to the altar, they don't come up front, but it's literally an altar call. So You're absolutely right when you're saying it's kind of a revival style of gathering, in the sense that the goal was to preach the gospel. And when you look at everybody that went through that memorial, everybody, like even Marco Rubio, they preached the gospel.
Yeah.
They talked about Jesus as being the savior and everything. So they were honoring Charlie Kirk for what they understood him to be, a kind of evangelist, a kind of person that was out there, and that for them, he died for his faith. And that's why everything that emerged out of the consequences of his death for a lot of these Christians is that Charlie Kirk is a martyr. Mm-hmm. You see?
Charlie.
The thing that mattered most to Charlie was his religion. It wasn't actually winning elections, though he was very good at it, and he cared about that too.
For over a century now, such an attempt to undermine and degrade the family. And so many people want to skirt past it and focus on tax policy. And Charlie was one that understood, no, there's a reason why they're going after this. There's a reason why that's being attacked.
What I'm encouraged about, and I think this reflects Charlie's thinking on this, is that humanity is hungry for truth and goodness and beauty. They are. And our culture has been at war with these things for a very long time.
And there's been an AI generated video that's been making the rounds on social media that also likens Charlie Kirk to a martyr. So in it, he's actually pictured among other well-known Christian martyrs such as Paul, Andrew, Peter, and Stephen. And in this video, he says, "My faith cost me my life, but now I stand forever in glory with those who also stood firm." So at this time, I'd like to introduce you to some of my brothers and new friends. And it's at this point that each of these martyrs, they take their own turns introducing themselves. And while each one is interesting in their own right, maybe we can just take some time to focus on Stephen, because in the Bible, in the book of Acts, specifically chapters 6 and 7, Stephen is the first Christian martyr. He is the first Christian recorded in the Bible to die for his faith.
It's almost like sending a signal to this Christian right that there's a new beginning now. There's a galvanization, because when Stephen was killed, it generated a renewed mission for the church. Stephen was martyred in Jerusalem. There was a persecution that came upon the early church, and it forced them to go out from Jerusalem into Samaria and start preaching the gospel, sending people out on the mission of spreading the gospel. And it's almost like you're telling people that this is a new beginning. This is something that has unleashed something. I'm going to stop here and you can jump in, but there was a big event at Dream City Church, and what they did is they had this kind of ceremony, memorial. Luke Barnett said a few words, but what was fascinating about this, at the end of his message, Luke Barnett said that through the death of Charlie Kirk, they've unleashed a dragon. Mm-hmm. They've unleashed the Kraken.
Yeah.
Which is a strange way to talk about the church, like a dragon. You know, these are not necessarily positive metaphors. Mm-hmm. The Kraken is not a positive metaphor. These are symbols of evil and subjugation. Yeah. Why are you using that to talk about the church?
Would you say there's any biblical foundation or history of using that in political discourse?
No, not in relation to the church. Okay. This is a weird metaphor.
Because to me, it sounds like something that would come out of the book of Revelation to talk about the negative forces that Jesus comes back to conquer.
Yeah, exactly. Like the dragon in the book of Revelation in chapter 12 is a symbol of Satan. It's not a positive symbol. I found that a bit strange to use that kind of language. But be that as it may, it's the narrative around martyrdom that kind of emerged.
And I think that here it's important to keep in mind the idea of Christian nationalism, the idea that politics and culture in the nation need to be aligned with a specific form of Christianity, and in this case, a conservative form of Christianity. Because in the U.S., when it comes to a figure like Charlie Kirk, the politics he espoused, even though for some they may not seem like things Jesus would advocate for conservative Christians, for conservative evangelicals, and not just evangelicals, but conservative Christians of all types in the United States, his political views were biblical. His political views were based in his biblical worldview. So when he is killed for his political views. He's also being killed for his Christian views, for his biblical worldviews. And for me personally, in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination here in Quebec, I've had a lot of colleagues, friends talk to me about this subject and ask me, based off of the evangelical response that they've seen in the media, through social media, things like the AI generated video we spoke of earlier, they asked me, how can Charlie Kirk, based on the things that he espoused politically, in their mind they have the question of how can he be considered a martyr? And I think it's this idea of Christian nationalism as a paradigm can help us make sense of the evangelical response to Charlie Kirk, because over the years, especially with the rise of Donald Trump, there's been many scholars, reporters, activists, so on, that have written about this subject of how we've really seen a conservative traditionalist form of evangelical theology, of Christian theology, be melded with a conservative political identity in the United States. And Charlie Kirk, I would argue, was very representative and a very aggressive promoter of this form of identity in politics, in the media. And many saw him as a firebrand, as someone who stood up for the faith and for the political view that the faith should have, the political expression and participation that it should have in the public square.
Tremendously honored to be the new CEO of Turning Point USA.
Is that normal? I'm just asking a question. I'm not saying anything. Is that normal? Give her a break. People have their way of grieving. I think grief is a real thing. Sometimes it's just taking over a podcast. Some people grieve differently. Fine. But what I am saying is it's really bizarre behavior. And if you can't recognize that after you lost your husband and you have two small children, and then you're squeezing daddy at the end of it, it's just weird. I mean, look at the footage. You decide.
Unfortunately, I'm on Reddit way too much. And so I see people talk about the evangelical response to Charlie Kirk. A lot of people saying, how are all these people smiling? You look at some of these speeches or sermons that come out online, and they're talking about this person that is supposed to be their friend. We need to understand that for them, this is a moment of possible revival. Yeah. It's a moment of something bigger. There's a story of a small revival that came out of the V1 church in Long Island, New York, where the head pastor there recently, who's done interviews in some Christian media, said that they've had upwards of 500 people in the weeks after Charlie Kirk's assassination where they came to the Lord. So it's a moment of sadness, obviously, but it's also a moment of revival that's going to restore Christianity in America. Again, coming back to this idea of Christian nationalism.
You're absolutely right. And it's tied to the idea of martyr, because martus in Greek means witness. So it's about witnessing your faith. You see, even when you use this expression martus in the New Testament, it's not always related to the idea of being killed for your faith or for your witness. Because of their Christian witness, because of their faith, then this notion of dying for the faith became also a form of martus, a form of testimony. So martus is witness, testimony. So they understand everything that Charlie Kirk had done or was doing with his tours and everything as being a witness, someone who testifies to the gospel. It's interesting what you were saying about revival also. Republican Representative Nancy Mace said Charlie Kirk was murdered so that the church could live on.
There you go.
And we're seeing Rob McCoy and Sean Foyt partnering in a new Turning Point USA tour called the Courageous Christianity Tour, which is a tour remembering Charlie Kirk. And when you look at their publicity, you have one of the quotes from Tertullian, which says, "The blood of the martyr is the seed of the church." I had posted this on one of my social media accounts, and someone was saying, it's interesting that the quote from Tertullian is about martyrs, plural. Here, they're using the blood of the martyr in reference to Kirk. So again, this notion of galvanizing Christians to be witnesses, all in resonance with everything that has been promoted through the AI videos, putting Charlie Kirk in the midst of other martyrs. It's again taking this opportunity to spread the Christian message in America. And what's important within all of this is their entire worldview is shaped along the lines of what they consider to be spiritual warfare.
Absolutely.
This is what Erica Kirk said. One of the first appearances after her husband's death was the fact that she understood that they were in a spiritual war and that spiritual warfare is palpable. So everything is seen through the prism of spiritual warfare. And a lot of the people that showed up on stage for that memorial, a lot of them also talked about spiritual warfare.
I think you'll probably find it more than you won't find it. So Luke Barnett, again, who posted his memorial to Charlie Kirk afterwards, he also talks about this as spiritual warfare. David Hernandez does as well. It's evidence of spiritual warfare and Christian persecution.
Yeah.
And the fact that Christians are currently being persecuted. This is something that Trump has been very explicit in saying that it's going to be, in a sense, politicized because they're going to investigate Christian persecution. So we got to keep this in mind, that this idea of Christian persecution, of anti-Christian bias, they're going to use this term specifically, anti-Christian bias, is directly linked to the idea of spiritual warfare. It's not just a political or cultural term. It's linked to the idea that there are demonic forces out to get Christians and to essentially harm the nation that many of them, let's say, I don't want to generalize too much, but that many of them are going to argue is inherently Christian, and it's their type of conservative cultural Christianity.
One of the things that we forgot to mention also is that the main idea that emerged out of this for many of them is this idea of martyrdom. But it was interesting to note also one of the Republican representatives of Texas, Troy Nahles, said that if Charlie Kirk had lived at the time of Jesus, he would have been the 13th apostle. You know? So again, putting a lot of emphasis on the exemplary life, at least what was perceived to be Charlie Kirk's exemplary life, Christian witness, is what comes out of this. Now, it's a tragic event, and nobody should ever have to experience this. No family deserves this. And there were a lot of unfortunate reactions from people rejoicing over this event. At the same time, there's others not rejoicing in any way towards this event, but really kind of flabbergasted with the fact that there were other political assassinations that were not really given much attention. We remember the death of Melissa Hortman and her husband at their home in June 2025. There was no flags flying half-mast for these people in any capacity, at least not from the White House. And you had other people reacting from the African-American community. They didn't rejoice in any capacity with respect to what had happened to this individual. There is something that came out on social media from a pastor from a Baptist church in Washington, Reverend Howard John Wesley, who said that Charlie Kirk did not deserve to be assassinated, but that he was shocked to see the American flags flying half-mast, and he was shocked that the nation was called to honor and venerate a man who was a racist and who had spent his entire life sowing division and hatred in the country. And he was saying that the way that you die does not redeem the way that you have lived. So not rejoicing in any way, but at the same time saying, as African Americans, they had been targeted by this man. They felt that this individual had sown a lot of division and hate throughout his time here on earth. So at the same time, you know, there's no way people should be rejoicing, but at the same time, there's no way that people should whitewash what came out of Charlie Kirk's political efforts in favor of what we deem to be now Christian nationalism.
We need to note, like you just did, the different types of Christian responses, because we don't want to make it seem like monolithically all evangelicals or Christians are responding in one particular way. And also there is the possibility of a nuanced perspective on this that I think is important to keep in mind.
Charlie Kirk did not deserve to be assassinated. But I'm overwhelmed seeing the flags of the United States of America at half-staff calling calling this nation to honor and venerate a man who was an unapologetic racist, spent all of his life sowing seeds of division and hate into this land. Hearing people with selective rage who were mad about Charlie Kirk but didn't give a damn about Melissa Hortman and her husband when they were shot down in their home, tell me I ought to have compassion for the death of a man who had no respect for my own life. I am sorry, but there's nowhere in Bible where we are taught to honor evil. How you die does not redeem how you lived.
With that, we're going to put an end to this episode. We hope that you liked this more political, off-the-cuff type of commentary. Maybe this is something that we can do every so often to just try to keep up with certain political events or news events that come up that we can speak to in particular, along with the more historical work that we're doing. So when you tune in to the next episode, we're going to be looking at apostolic Pentecostalism. And until then, take care. Thanks for tuning in to Spirit, State, and Society, the podcast where global Pentecostal and charismatic movements meet politics, culture, and everyday life. If this episode sparked your interest, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and drop us a message. Want more? Head over to our Substack page to subscribe and access other episodes, resources, and fresh insights you won't want to miss. We've got more thought-provoking conversations coming your way, so stay connected, and we'll see you next time on Spirit, State, and Society.